So just a couple of logistics. My name is Pastor Marcy. I'm the senior pastor at Magnolia United Church of Christ, and welcome to all of our guests and visitors. We're so happy you can be here. You don't need your camera on. I'm going to go ahead and keep everybody muted and keep letting people in as they're coming in. There's a lot of interest in this topic. It's incredibly timely. Welcome to our first of our monthly, we're going to call them our third Monday educational forums. This month, we were just so fortunate to have Reverend Alyssa here to talk about cults and conspiracies. At the end, I'll talk a little bit about what we got planned for next month, but we are just so honored to have her here today to do this. So thank you to Reverend Alyssa. I'm going to go on mute and let you introduce yourself and take it from here. Thank you so much.
It's wonderful to be here with all of you. So I have to admit that this topic is a huge topic. So I am condensing a lot of information into a very short amount of time. So I am probably not going to cover everything. I ask that you wait till the end for questions. Jot them down or put them in the chat box, and then we'll have time to talk and discuss and debrief. Just because there's so much information, I want you all to get the information, and then we can talk about it at the end. I will also at the end have a handout for anyone who wants that I'll put in the chat box that will actually have even more information than the information I'm giving you today. As Reverend Marcy said, this is a very timely topic, and it may seem unusual at first to think about why would we talk about cults? Why would we talk about conspiracy theories? I think right now it's a little easier to talk about conspiracy theories because they're just everywhere right now. But these two C words can feel very foreign and very abstract. And the reality is what we're talking about is abusive systems of power. And we're also talking about people's deep-seated desires and needs and how we meet those. And I think all of us can connect in some way to that. So I am going to share my screen here. And again, if there's ever a time you can't hear me, please don't hesitate to cut me off and let me know, because I can always put on headphones. So the reason I come to you to talk about this is cults are really the family business. So this photograph that you see here is one of the, if not the earliest photographs of the Church of Scientology, before it was actually called the Church of Scientology. And those two men sitting there are my great-grandfather and my grandfather, L. Ron Hubbard and L. Ron Hubbard Jr. So I did not personally grow up in the Church of Scientology, nor did my father. His parents left the church when he was about 6 years old, but it haunted him for his entire life. So they were stopped by the church until he was 16. And the church, in agreement with my father's family, decided they would leave them alone if our family changed our name. Hence, we get the name DeWolf, which actually is a very long genealogical name. It goes back many, many more generations than Hubbard does. But this world of cults, this world of trauma, of passed down trauma, this world of conspiracy theories is one that I was born into. And so talking about it today with you, and as I've been talking about it more and more, I like to say it's sort of a second coming out for me of my coming out with my cultic experiences. But these photographs here, you'll see in the upper left corner, that's Harry Ross Hubbard and Ida Waterbury, who are the parents of L. Ron Hubbard. Below, you'll see my great-grandmother, Margaret Grubbs, also called Polly, who was the first wife of L. Ron Hubbard, who you will not read about in official Scientology records because we were expunged from the official records. A wedding photo of my grandma and my grandpa, as well as a picture of my grandpa probably holding my father. And then you'll see a young picture of my father, and then my father with my son, whose middle name is Lafayette, which is what the L stands for in L. Ron Hubbard. I could do an entire presentation just full of fun stories for you all. But we're talking about cults and we're talking about conspiracy theories. And they have a lot in common. So really, in a lot of ways, what we're going to learn about cults and what we're going to learn about conspiracy theories all have to do with each other. All this information builds on itself. But first and foremost, what is the difference between a cult and a religion? And honestly, there's not a lot of difference. One thing is that if you can get religious status, you get the wonderful religious tax exemption. And oftentimes having tax exemption for a lot of groups that call themselves a religious group gives them legitimacy in the eyes of the world, the country, whatever community they're in. But the real difference between a cult and a religion is time. A lot of established religions that we know today, if we were to encounter them in their beginnings, such as Christian Science, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventist, Mormonism, we would have defined them as a cult. Now, most people would define them as established religion. We're not going to debate on whether they're cults or not still. But the reality is that for a lot of groups that are now called religions, it's because they've been around for a really long time. And it's also because they have moved away from a singular leader. So again, where Christian Science and Jehovah's Witness and Seventh-day Adventist and even Mormonism were started by a single person, and that single person's vision and view of God and the world really led those groups initially. What kept them going and helped them be seen more as religions is that the emphasis shifted from following this one leader to following the movement itself. And then most importantly to know is that not all cults are religions or have religious ideas. Cults can be yoga or new age movements. They can be pyramid schemes, self-help groups. It can be just following a person, a personality, and political movements. So when we're talking about cults versus conspiracies, what's the difference? A cult is organized around an individual. And this will keep coming up over and over again, this individual. The leader can promote conspiracy theories, but the allegiance is not to the theories or even the organization. The allegiance is to the person. So the organization could not exist without that person's leadership and without their guidance. And so some groups that you'll find that the leader has died, they will still see the leader as living and functioning as if they were alive. Or there'll be a deep sense of waiting for the second return of this person or a reincarnation of this person. But the difference is that it's all based off of this person. Occasionally, you'll have more than one person. So if you know anything about Heaven's Gate, which there was recently a documentary that HBO did, they started with two people. One of those two people who were a couple died, and then it became really run by one person. So there are instances where it's not just one person, it's a couple people, but it's very rare. Conspiracies, on the other hand, are organized around an idea or a group of ideas. So leaders can emerge, but it's not about the leader, it is about the idea that is central. So think about right now with all the anti-vaccination stuff going out there. We hear from so many different people, and they may all be related in whether it's their political affiliation or the network on TV that they work for, but people are not following the individual, they are following the idea of anti-vaxxing or whatever that theory is described as. Oh, and now it doesn't, there we go. And just in general, sometimes when we come from a more progressive or more politically correct background, we can hear the word cult and think that it's a bad word or it's a word that we shouldn't use. I completely disagree. I think it's super important for us to use the word cult. I think it's super important for us to use the word conspiracy theory. And the reason is for cults especially, there is an established cultural history. When you say something is a cult, you have an idea in your head of what somebody is talking about. You're not thinking about necessarily church on Sunday. You're not thinking about, hopefully, Magnolia UCC. You're probably going to start thinking about something like the Church of Scientology, or you might think about Manson and his followers, or Heaven's Gate, or Waco. There's hundreds of cults that have been around for time, but there's an established kind of idea, vision, sense of what that means. There is a clear definition of and rubric of what is and what is not a cult. People have been studying groups that are systematic forms of abuse for a long time. There is a lot of research, there is a lot of science out there about how these groups work, how they function. There is a pattern. And then the other thing is that it really helps people identify and understand these systematic forms of abuse. It helps people understand that they are victims. It helps people understand that some of the choices and some of the things that have happened to them that they were not able to fully choose or fully be able to participate with all of their self-capacity, that there was just a lot of manipulation going on, a lot of abuse going on. And really importantly, it helps people know what kind of help and what kind of treatment is necessary to heal from these groups. I think everybody should go to a therapist, but if you have or know somebody who's come out of a cultic situation, it is very important for them to see a therapist who understands what it is to grow up or to be a part of a cult, because there are different things at work that an average therapist would necessarily have the skill to help you navigate. And again, remembering that cults are not always new religious movements, that cults can be anything that a group of people follow a particular individual, and in following that individual, come to find themselves in abusive, systematic situations. So a lot of times too, when I've done these presentations, people will say, this sounds a lot like domestic abuse or partner abuse. And there are so many similarities, but what we're really dealing with, even though some of this abuse that is happening is person to person, it is done so in a systematic form, that the church itself or the organization itself is structured in such a way that it promotes and fosters these forms of abuse. Which I would hope that when we think about the church, we're not thinking about establishing something that's going to be promoting and fostering abusive, traumatic situations and experiences. We're kind of trying to do the opposite. So profiling a cult leader. Here are some famous cult leaders, and I wanted to give us a good cross section. They've come in every color, they come in every gender, they're from all over the world. If you don't know who some of these are, I am not going to know all of their names, it's just terrible. But we have Mr. Applewhite here, who's Heaven's Gate, next to my great grandfather, L. Ron Hubbard. We've got the guy who's from Waco. The three sisters above him started the spiritualist movement in the 1800s. We have Jim Jones next to them, Amy Semple McPherson below them. In the upper corner, the guy who has been in the news a lot lately, who's the leader of NXIVM, and so on and so on. So it's really important to understand cult leaders, who they are, how they function. There are similarities. Most of them have narcissistic personalities. They're what psychologists would say classic narcissists. They're often charismatic individuals. You want to follow them. They're good speakers. They capture your attention, which is ironic because they're also very unpredictable. And a lot of that unpredictableness is because they have this, in a sense, God complex. They think they can do and get away with whatever they want. And this includes things that sort of what we call turn-ons, that allow them to do things that in any other circle would be seen as wrong or bad. But for them, they have no shame about them. They don't feel the guilt or the pain of that. And the reality is that not everyone is instantly a cult leader. Some people evolve over time. Not everyone goes out to start a cult and says, this would be a great idea. Now, mind you, someone like my great grandfather literally did go out to start a cult because he said, you want to make a lot of money, you should start a religion, especially if you get tax exemption, then you can make a ton of money. So there was actually intent from the beginning. But for some people like Applewhite and Heaven's Gate, it began as a real earnest desire to do good in the world and to understand the world. And as power emerged and as the group became more isolated, then these cultic behaviors kind of emerged. We just have to remind ourselves constantly that no one actually joins a cult. No one, looks online and says, this looks like an amazing cult. I really want to give them my membership and hand over my life to them. That sounds awesome. And no one really that I know of decides outright to be a conspiracy theorist. If you know someone in your life who is believing in a conspiracy theory, one of the worst things you can do is to tell them that they are a conspiracy theorist. Because of course they're going to think that they're right. They're going to say, no, I'm not. And even if I am, like, what I know is true. So who is targeted? Who are the folks who are most likely to become a part of these groups, to become believers in conspiracy theories? And before I get into these two categories of the vulnerable and the influential, all of you who are here today are great candidates for joining a cult. If we think to ourselves, oh, never could be me, or I could never believe in a conspiracy theorist. I love science. You just set yourself up for failure, for cultic failure, because it's so much about manipulation. It's so much about being in vulnerable positions and people preying upon that vulnerability. So we don't need to live in fear, but we need to be honest with ourselves and with those around us that really anyone could fall susceptible to cultic groups and to conspiracy theories. So when we find ourselves with family members or friends or neighbors, and we're like, I just thought Joe was, a rational guy. I can't understand why he would think these things. Well, Joe's just like everyone else. And we got to ask ourselves, what's going on in Joe's life that would have brought him to this situation? We'll talk more about how to help folks too. All right. Again, I told you I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you. So if you need me to slow down, please don't hesitate to ask. First and foremost, these groups, these ideologies are very, they go after people who are vulnerable, and they are very enticing for those who are vulnerable. So I like to do this little experiment. And I'm actually going to get out of the slide mode and put you all in gallery mode. And so if you have your video on, that's great. If you don't, and you're able to go to, there's a little icon that you can put a thumbs up or a high five. And if you can't, that's fine. You'll still get the visual of this. If you have your video on, you can just raise your hand. So I'm going to read these things on this list. And if any of them apply to you, I want you to either raise your actual hand or put the little hand up icon on your computer, your little screen. You think we can do that? If we utterly fail at it, it is okay. You can answer it in your own space. All right. Have any of you-
Larissa, let me just clarify for anybody who's looking for it. If you scroll along the bottom, you'll see something called reactions.
Yes.
And if you click on that, you'll see some different reactions over there. And you're asking for the thumbs up on that one?
Yeah, either
right?
the thumbs up or the hands up is fine. So if any of you have ever had a recent loss of a job or a sudden change in your lifestyle, you can put your hand up. And then you'll have to take your hand down as well after each one. If any of you have ever had a loss of a loved one or loss of a community, and this includes like a breakup, not just death, you can put your hand up. You can put your hands down. If any of you have ever moved somewhere and been new to an area, if you have ever felt isolated or lonely, if you have ever wanted to make the world a better place, have any of you ever been eager to improve yourself by gaining wealth or healthy habits or more knowledge, whatever that means for you? Yeah. And have any of you ever been in a crisis situation, whether a personal, local, national, or global crisis? Now think to yourself, you can all now take your hands and your thumbs up off, but think to yourself how many times you rose your hand, and think to yourself also how many of those things might have overlapped for you at one time. You know, oftentimes when we are new to an area, we become lonely, or we move to an area because of a loss, whether it's of a job or a loved one. And I think all of us, especially if we're part of a religious community, we want to make the world a better place. We want to improve ourselves. So all of these factors line up to put people in a very vulnerable position, whether they know they're in a vulnerable position or not. And when you're in a vulnerable place, it is much easier for folks to come in and to make you feel welcome or loved or included, or that you're improving yourself, or that you're helping the world. And that's why no one joins a cult, because most people join these groups or start believing in these ideas because they are fulfilling a need in their life, whether it's loneliness, whether it's loss, whether it's control or knowledge. They're fulfilling something, and these groups come along at that right time and help fulfill that. And by the time they realize that they're so deep in, if they realize they're so deep in, it no longer is about the initial need. The other category of folks are influential folks. So that giant square of tiny people's faces, those are all the celebrities that have been affiliated with or been members of the Church of Scientology. The middle picture, if the two women there are the Brofman sisters, who are the heirs to the Brofman fortune, which is the Seagram fortune. So, you know, the alcohol, ginger ale, and they basically funded the cult Nexium, which has been in the news a lot lately. And then does anyone know, and you can unmute yourself, who the bottom group is? Who are these dapper gentlemen in black and white? Anybody?
Beach Boys. Beach Boys.
It's the Beach Boys. Because one of the Beach Boys, and his name is escaping me right now, was a acquaintance, friend of Marilyn Manson. during the height of Manson's power and got kind of roped into Manson's world, was able to get himself out before the murders, but has that connection with Manson. So these groups will intentionally go after middle class or wealthy folks because they need people to fund their organizations and they need connections to make their organizations look legitimate. And for those who are narcissists who are leading these groups, what is a better ego boost to a narcissist than to befriend and have as a member of your group somebody who is famous or powerful or influential? So when we think to ourselves, sometimes the myth of people who are parts of cults, people will often say, well, I'm not dumb or I'm not stupid. I wouldn't join a cult. Like, I have a brain. Well, if you were quote unquote dumb or quote unquote stupid, these cults would probably not come for you because there's nothing you can give them. If you know anything about how the Church of Scientology works, is people bankrupt their entire lives to seek acceptance and to seek higher powers of thought and levels within the church, that there is an actual financial commitment that is required. So if you're poor, if you don't have a lot of resources, if you are uneducated and education and gaining knowledge is not something that's important to you, you're probably not going to join these groups. They love to go after literally attractive people because people want to join groups with all the attractive people. And again, people who are insiders who have connections. So in particular for conspiracy theories can build upon these different categories of who, but they also are building upon three primary questions. So people who believe in conspiracy theories because they are trying to answer one or up to three of these three questions. And these have to do with safety, control, and community. So when somebody is asking a question about safety, is their life has become disrupted in such a way that they don't know, what's coming down the pipeline. They don't feel safe anymore, whether it's literal physical safety, whether it's emotional safety, psychological safety. And so they're asking this question of, how can I be safe? So think again about anti-vaxxers and think about that, the idea of anti-vaxxing in correlation with answering this question, am I safe? So for somebody who is experiencing the pandemic, and we all experienced the pandemic with all of us already having our own baggage. We all, maybe not, we're going through our own personal pandemics, but we all had our own stuff going on before the pandemic happened. And for many people, the pandemic just made that baggage, made that stuff 100 times worse. Or sometimes for people, you thought you were fine, you thought you were good, the pandemic hit and your whole life fell apart and you're like, I am not okay. Like, as the more I'm in quarantine, the more I realize that I don't feel safe. I don't feel okay. So they're asking these questions of, how can I feel safe? What makes me feel like I'm going to be okay? And for them, kind of clamping onto this idea of not getting the vaccine equals I am safe. It's more important about the feeling safe than it is about the logic of whether or not you should get the vaccine. So the second question, which really in a lot of ways is a consequence of the first question, is control. People feel out of control. They feel that they no longer have control over their own lives. And so they're seeking ideas or ways that will give them control over their life. So again, anti-vaxxers, if the government is telling you to get the vaccine, or the CDC is telling you to get the vaccine, and you feel out of control and you don't know who to trust, and you don't know if trusting so-and-so is going to, burn you in the long run, then it can be very easy to say, well, I'm just not going to listen to you. You all are liars and crazy, because I rather listen to something that speaks to me, that makes me feel safe and makes me feel like I'm controlling what's happening to my body and happening to my family and my community. The third thing is people are seeking community, which also is phrased sometimes as seeking belonging. And again, all of these build on each other. So you don't feel safe, you don't feel in control. If you don't feel safe and you don't feel in control, you usually don't have a very strong community, or you think you don't have a very strong community. And so for a lot of conspiracy theories, the community that comes with the conspiracy theory gives them purpose and gives them a feeling of belonging. And oftentimes how conspiracy theories works is it's very black or white. It's very right or wrong. And it's very us versus them. And there is no better way to feel like you belong than to feel like you're part of the us and everyone else is the them. Like you have the special knowledge, you have the special group of folks, therefore you belong. And these questions are super important for us to remember, because they also help us know how to help these folks, but also what's at stake. Because when someone feels like this question is being answered, if we come along and say, no, you're wrong, we put them right back in a state of chaos and anxiety. And so we really have to speak to the chaos and the anxiety more so than the rightness or the wrongness. And that's something we have to retrain our brain. When we're dealing with people who are in cults and who are believers of conspiracy theories, we want to avoid the conversation of right and wrong like we want to avoid the plague, no pun intended. Because it is not about who's right. It is not about who's wrong. It is about what is going on in the person's life and what needs are being met. And fun fact, conspiracy theories have been happening since the dawn of time, since, language was invented, and they often almost always happen in times of crisis. So we think to ourselves, why is it happening so much right now? Well, global pandemic, but also, we can even go back a little bit farther. We think we've been in a 20-year war that just recently ended in Afghanistan. We can think about, we had a first Black president, which for many of us was like, yay, exciting. But for a whole other part of the population was like, awful, terrible, the world is ending. You can look to, even in a more nuclear, smaller sense, did people have a hurricane or a major fire or earthquake happen? Was there some political upheaval? So always kind of like take a couple steps back and ask yourself, what is going on in the big picture? And how might the big picture being affecting this individual's choices in what groups they're a part of and what they believe? So before we talk about how to help these folks, I want to kind of go back a little bit. And we now know who joins. We now know why they believe or what's going on in their lives. But it's also important to recognize the different things that are happening in the different stages of joining a cult or in really doubling down on believing in a conspiracy theory. So people's first attraction, what gets them in the door, what starts them believing. For this is more particular, these slides, to cults. One thing that's not on this slide is for conspiracy theories. A lot of the rise in conspiracy theory is also due to our increased presence online and to an increased loneliness or disconnect from people, from physical contact. And so they go down these rabbit holes, whether it's Reddit or 4chan or these other websites, that they then connect with different folks and find these answer to these questions in community. But for those who are kind of more joining groups, oftentimes they're brought in through self-help classes. through that insider community, that group effect, that think like, hey, like we have the right knowledge. We have the right group. We have the right way to heaven. There's a lot of manipulation around emotions, having a charismatic experience. I am not ashamed to admit that I watched The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, the reality show. And before the pandemic, if you ever notice, they always put the couples in dates that will cause a high adrenaline rate. So they'll put, they'll make them go skydiving, or they'll put them on a helicopter, or they'll make them do something wacky and crazy, because science shows that if you go through an experience with someone that jacks up your adrenaline, that you are more likely to bond with that person and to feel the effects of love than if you were to just like go on a nice walk by the beach. And so these groups know that, and they'll put people in heightened states of experience. They'll put people in situations that just really play with people's emotions. And one of those ways, you'll hear this phrase love bomb talked about a lot in cultic studies, is the groups will just surround and love on new individuals like they've never been loved on before. Just, you're the greatest. It's so great that you're here. I'm so glad you're here. You're such an awesome person. So all those feelings of insecurity, all those feelings of not feeling safe or in control, all those feelings of loss kind of just go away, because people are just making you feel so good about yourself. And the reality is many of these folks, they just connect initially with the leader's teachings. If you know anything about what Scientology believes, well, Scientology at its really core believes that the god Xenu, who is an alien god, took people's souls and threw them into a volcano. And those souls got disconnected, which are called engrams, and then reconnected onto other people. And you now have to go and use these e-meters, which is this picture here, and remove those engrams from you. Well, that is not what they teach you at Scientology 101. You don't get that lesson until you are like in Scientology, gosh, like 700, like way down the line. You get in through, oftentimes with Scientology, through speech classes, public speaking classes, or they'll do acting classes. Why are there so many actors in Scientology? Because they target them, and they do these like cheap and free acting classes. You're getting in through things that you're connecting with that aren't, what you feel like you're reading a Pulp Fiction novel, which, again, if you didn't know this, L. Ron Hubbard was a Pulp Fiction sci-fi writer before he was a cult leader, hence why the cult sounds like a science fiction novel. The second phase, so you got yourself through the door. Why do you stay? You stay because there's initial positive results. You had a good time. Things are getting better in your life. You're learning stuff that's really helping you. And this can be really difficult for somebody who comes out of a cult or even comes out of a conspiracy theory, because there can be good that happens to that person and growth that happens to that person. And it can feel very discombobulating to disconnect the growth that happened with the abuse and manipulation that was also happening at the same time. The second thing is there's an increased detachment from outside influences. So you're going to hear more language about us versus them, more language about disconnecting from the outside world, or only participating with the outside world if it's in recruitment of other folks into the organization. There's a need to progress in doctrinal teaching. A lot of these groups, there'll be like a hierarchy of classes or stages of knowledge, and you just are constantly having to do more and more and more to be deeper and deeper and farther into the inner circle. They also do things like they give people promotions. They give you more responsibilities. That love bomb becomes, you're so great that we really think it would be great if you became a leader. And now that that person is a leader and has more responsibility, they have an increased time commitment. And with the increased time commitment, they're giving less time to the outside world. And eventually all of their time will be to the organization. And then they make friends, they form a community, they feel like they're part of something special, they feel like they're part of an insider group. And then lastly, why don't they just leave? I hear this question so often. Why doesn't the person just leave? Before I get into the why don't they just leave, on the right hand of this screen is something called the BITE model. And this is by Dr. Stephen Hassan. And the BITE model, which stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotional, are 4 categories of how to discern whether or not something is a cult or an abusive system. And so if you're really interested in kind of learning more, I encourage you to Google the BITE model, and he's got a bunch of books and other kind of stuff. He loves to be interviewed on podcasts, but you can really learn even more from this stuff that I'm telling you. So why don't they just leave? As I said before, oftentimes there's a financial obligation and a financial disconnection. So the obligation, is paying for the classes, requiring a tithe or a percentage of a person's income. The disconnection comes because oftentimes folks stop working in real jobs, real being not a part of the community, and are only working for the organization that they're a part of. So they actually lose the ability to even make income. Their income and their financial well-being is completely dependent on the organization that they're a part of. There's a lot of physical exhaustion and mental manipulation that occurs. And that's putting people in tasks, constantly making them do work, a lot of sleep deprivation is a big one. The indexium, a big one for the women's inner circle that got famous on the news, was they were told they could only eat so many calories in the day. And so that both is a physical and a mental manipulation, because lack of calories makes you unable to coherently think, and lack of sleep makes you unable to make fully informed choices in life. And so your brain is literally being conditioned in a way that you cannot make fully thought out and realized decisions. You are cut off from your outside community. You're also cut off from outside information and resources, that you're not allowed to read the news. You're not allowed to Google or have access to Google to read criticisms or critiques. You're only allowed to read, materials that denounce the critics, that are either justified or okayed by the group itself. As we said before, more demands for your time and commitment. For some of these folks, they become geographically isolated. Jonestown, these people moved to a different country and were in a little island. You can't just decide one day, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore because of all these other factors. But just the geographic factor is you'd have to get yourself out of that community somehow. You'd have to get yourself physically on a plane, if you even have access to your passport, and then have the hopefully financial wherewithal to be able to pay to get on the plane to get you back to whatever your native country is. There's blackmail. There's confession, which is used as blackmail. So a lot of these groups will have you tell your deepest, darkest secrets, and then they'll record them and they keep them for prosperity. So when you try and leave, they say, well, I'm going to make it public, all the things that you told us. And then threats of violence to self or family. Oops. So now the how do you help? There are a lot of techniques of how to help. And before I even get into any of them, the reality is, for somebody who is in a cult, not somebody who is starting to be in a cult, but somebody who's in it, and somebody who is a true believer of conspiracy theories, it is extremely hard to get them out or to get them to stop believing. Almost impossible. I don't want that to discourage you, but I want you to know what you're getting yourself into. because it is a commitment to say, I'm going to help someone, I'm going to love someone, I'm going to continue to be in relationship with someone that is part of a cult or that is a true believer of a conspiracy theory. And this is why, again, this safety, control, and community is so important. So for these folks, this picture on the left, they feel in a lot of ways like they're drowning. And so they're seeking help. They're seeking that safety. And these groups or these ideas have come along and they've given them a life raft in essence, which then gives them control over their life. And then they come in like this Coast Guard boat and give them a community of people who rescue them from and give them a feeling of belonging. So when you swoop in and you tell them that this group they're a part of and these ideas they're a part of are wrong and bad and they shouldn't believe or be in them anymore, you are asking them to take away their community, to take away their feeling of control, and to take away their sense of community. And this is why it's important to recognize that and why it's so important not to make this a conversation about right and wrong. Because what's at stake is not truth. What's at stake is literally people's existence and concept of the world and their community and their what they deem as their family and friends. So what you're really saying when you go to someone and you say, this you're in a cult, this cult is bad, you need to get out, is you're telling them you need to leave the thing in your life that gives you community, that gives you meaning, and that gives you purpose. So you need to have no community, no meaning, and no purpose. Like, you better have community and meaning and purpose waiting there for that person, or be willing to go through the trenches with that person to provide them and to supplement that for them, because you're asking someone to really risk a lot, even if it's for their better, even if it's to get them out of these abusive situations and these toxic situations. Like, logic here, ironically, sometimes doesn't always work. And this is what can make us feel maddening when we're working with these folks. But when we understand what's at stake, it helps us understand how to help these folks. So I like to think of people in this triangular sense, and you can replace the word cult with conspiracy theory, but where the triangle is the whole person, and you're dealing with these three aspects of personality: the pre-cult person, the cult person, and the post-cult person. And that's assuming they get out. So there's different techniques you have to do, and we'll talk about the different techniques of working with someone who's gotten out. We're only going to focus on this pre-cult and cult person. So someone who's you knew before they got into the group, or someone who is now actively in a group or believing in a theory. They need someone who can maintain their pre-cultic or conspiracy theory connections, but who is also open to learning about the cult. Curiosity is your greatest gift when working with these folks, whether it's cults or conspiracy theories. Again, don't get into a debate. What you do instead, and it feels counterintuitive, is you ask the person to explain what they believe and why the group or their theory is important to them. You basically, in a way, ask them to convert you. And when we ask someone, oh, why is it really important to you? What is this about this that makes you feel safe? What is it about this that really resonates with you? Why do you like this person so much? What is it about this group that, has drawn you in? Why should I be a part of this? Why should I believe this? Is as that person begins to talk to you about their group that they're in or the theory that they believe, is you are forcing that person to be a critical thinker, because these groups do not want you to be a critical thinker. They give you all the information, they tell you what to believe, and you're supposed to just do it. But as you get somebody to really think about and assess and answer the questions that you're giving, that person is then put in a position where they have to be critical and they have to dig into these beliefs and these groups that they're a part of. and always done in a way that you're genuinely curious. You're not being critical. You're not saying, why would you believe in that? Versus, why is that important to you? What is it about this that's so important to you? I really want to know. It seems like it's making you happy. What about it is making you so happy? And you can bring in then questions from the outside world. Well, I hear you saying this, but from my experience, I've experienced this. Why are these things contradicting themselves? Like, what's going on here? And it's also important too, in this idea of maintaining connections. I didn't say you want to maintain the pre-cult personality, because that's gone. Like, they'll have aspects of who they were that, we have parts of ourselves that we carry for our whole life. And then we have parts of ourselves that we ditch over time, that evolve, that change. But the connection is so important, because these groups are actively trying to disconnect that person from anything that is not a part of the group or is not a part of the theory. And so you have to do everything possible to maintain that connection. So you're not maintaining it in a way of like, better. Like, I've known you for X amount of years. I know you know better. That nobody likes to hear that. Instead, it's like, okay, you've called them 10 times and they never pick up your phone. Well, you could stop calling them, or you could call them 10 more times, and you could send them a letter, and you can email them, and you can find ways that you're not criticizing them in a way that's saying, why aren't you answering your phone? But you're saying, I really miss you. I really want to see you. When's the next time I can see you? Or I just was thinking about you. I really would love to hear from you. When's the next time we can talk? You're always maintaining those connections. You're always keeping the door open, because especially cults, when they find out that there is a person in your life who is actively keeping communication with you and relationship with you, they will start to say things like, well, that person wants no good from you. They're just trying to keep you from progressing in this group. They just want to hurt you. They don't want the best for you. You better watch out what they're saying. They're trying to manipulate you, which a lot of it is ironic, because that's what the group is doing. So it's always important to keep that love, that connection going. And so I call these the fruits of the spirit technique. So taking the fruits of the spirit, what we find in scripture, if we take these, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things. It can help us to reach out to folks who are in these situations. So first and foremost, love. Never stop loving that person, and never stop letting them know you love them. Do not take it for granted. Don't say, well, they know they love me. No, remember, the love bomb is what got them in. So love bomb them back. Joy. Celebrate, emphasize how much joy their contact brings you. Again, it's that difference between, why aren't you picking up the phone? Why haven't I seen you? To, I'm just so excited that you answered me. It's so great to see you. It's your birthday. I'm so happy birthday. Peace. Avoid debating and conflict. You want to maintain a peaceful, safe haven. They want to be able to feel like they can come to you, they can talk to you, that they are safe with you. Patience. It can take a long, long time. Don't give up. A long time. Kindness. Offer multiple modes of help, generosity, and charity. We so focus on this debate of right and wrong that we don't recognize, again, those other factors that are bringing people to these destructive places. And so sometimes for somebody, kindness is literally saying, I can offer you a job, or you can come stay in my guest bedroom for a while, or with a lot of awareness and a lot of intention, giving somebody money. And the reason I say awareness and intention is you don't want money to feed the cult and feed the conspiracy theory. But for many of these folks who are disconnected from finances, they need the money. They need, paperwork, ID, For folks born into the cults, they might not even have a birth certificate. So offering different, being creative, cooking for them, making their favorite batch of cookies, giving them their favorite, book that you knew that they liked. Next, goodness. Focus on the good. Be curious. Focus on the good. And you're going to have to retrain yourself because it's going to be irritating. And they're going to have all the answers. And they're going to know exactly what to say back in a lot of ways. This, again, is why we don't debate, because oftentimes they're trained to know what to say in a debate. So you just want to focus on the good. Celebrate the good. You want to be a positive experience in their life. Faithfulness. Show up. Answer the phone. Don't give up. Gentleness. Lead with compassion, not anger or disappointment. And self-control. You need to set clear boundaries for yourself. You need to make sure that you do not become a product of the manipulation, a product of the destructiveness, and a product of the trauma. Trauma can be passed down. It can be passed down through our genetics. It can be passed down through parent and child. You need to set clear boundaries. And then the most important thing, well, not most important, but another important thing is that somebody who has been born into a cult is in a completely different category and requires often a different set of techniques. For someone who is born into a cult, there is no pre-cult person. Instead, they have to go through what is in essence a rebirth. They have to learn lessons and cultural cues and ways of being in the world that they would have learned as a child, but now are having to learn as an adult. So I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I just want us to be aware that there's a difference. And this is the last 2 slides I have. I know I'm a little over an hour here, but I get told there's a lot of information. Well, I talked about, we focused a little on the helping somebody who is in a cult, but it's really important if you know somebody who has gotten out, whether it's out of a cult or whether it's out of a conspiracy theory, that there is a long haul of care and healing that needs to occur and that will occur. Just because they got out doesn't mean the journey is done. We celebrate it, we're excited about it, but now the real work has begun. You're like, the real work, it took me 20 years to get them out. What are you talking about? I love this phrase, anxiety. To get rid of anxiety, you either need to cry it out or you need to sweat it out. So finding a therapist that specializes in cults. You can go to the International Cultic Organization. They have a huge list of therapists by state. And they have a ton of other resources that are really great. Just because they left doesn't mean they left their indoctrination, their rituals, their ideas, their ways of being in the world. It's going to take a long time because you literally have to reroute the connections in your brain. You got to create a new normal, move the body and body care, stuff like massage therapy, Reiki. There are special trauma massage therapists who help people who have been through physical trauma heal and reemerge. If you don't know what EMDR is it's a therapeutic technique about following eye movement and has been incredibly helpful for people dealing with trauma and post-traumatic stress. Get a routine going. Make sure where they are is safe. Get documentation in order. Some of these folks don't have ID anymore. They don't have birth certificates. They don't have a resume. You might have to help them with practical things. Play, laugh, have intentional moments of joy. Reconnect them with family and friends. And in the reconnection, you don't want it to be, this is my daughter who just got out of a cult. Isn't it great? You haven't seen her in 5 years, but she's back. But reconnecting in a way of like, this is your cousin so-and-so. This is what's been going in their life for the last 5 years. These are things that you guys have in common. Remember that time, we went camping and you thought it was so fun. Like, that's what we're talking about, of reconnection. You don't need to ignore the elephant in the room that, they were gone in a cult for 5 years, but it's not, doesn't have to be the main thing. Help them form a new community. Recognize that there will be PTSD for a while. validate their experiences in the cult. Be careful when you say things like, well, I just don't understand what that would be like, or I don't understand how you could do that. Or that just sounds crazy. But like, wow, that must have been really hard. Like, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I don't know what that's like, but I imagine that was awful. And then realize that they might go back or to another cult, or conspiracy theory. The likelihood of folks believing in another cult or going back to the cult or believing in another conspiracy theory is very high. And it's something we don't like to talk about because we're so excited that they got out or that they saw reason, that we don't want to think about the possibility of them it's like addiction, reusing in a way. And I just think it's important, this phrase of, it's about learning not just how to survive, but how to thrive. So this is my contact information. If anyone wants to reach out to me and has any particular questions, or wants particular resources, I'm always happy to do that. So I'll leave this up for a little bit, but I am done talking and I would love to hear from all of you. So if you have any questions or clarifying anything, the time is yours.
So this is Pastor Marcy, and I just want to say I so thankful for the content, because you're right. So much of what you said seems counterintuitive, and it sounds like you're really stressing connection and relationship. And that's such a beautiful, that's not what I think about when I think about how to engage with somebody who's deep into a conspiracy, which I have in my family. So
Me too.
so I just really, I'm just thankful for calling me back to connection. If there's anybody who has a question, do you want to raise your hand, or you'll have to unmute yourself because I do have everybody on mute.
And I want to just emphasize with what Reverend Marcy was saying is that connection is key, but we also have to be aware that sometimes we can, for our own safety, and that's good boundaries, that we do sometimes have to say, I have to walk away. And that doesn't mean we're shutting the door. We can always say, I'm walking away, and the door is always open if we can come together safely. But that doesn't mean you always have to get pulled through the mill over and over and over again. You want to make sure that you're not getting sucked into the trauma, someone else's trauma, which can be very hard.
I just want to say thank you so much, because this is so timely for me. And I have a lot of family members that have a lot of different views. And my question would be how to, I haven't done it very well up until now. So I've made it known how I feel about things. And I've gotten pretty emotional because I'm worried about my family. And how do you start that path? It's almost, is it almost like you have to ignore the fact that they're there and that just pretend like everything's normal? Or, I mean, I just don't.
You don't have to pretend everything's normal. Connection is not about lying or, putting on a brave face to, grinning and bearing it. This is not a situation of grinning and bearing it. I think what you said actually answers your question of, I'm worried about you, because the conversation is different when it is about, hey, I'm just really worried about you. For one, it's an I statement. You're not, we have to be careful not to do you should do that, and you should, think this, especially when we're put in an emotional state where we really care about what's happening to these people, and we really hurt when we see them making bad choices or making bad decisions. So bringing it from that heart place, connection is about heart and compassion. And, I would assume most of us here call ourselves Christian. And when we look at the scripture and Jesus, the idea of loving one's neighbor, of loving unconditionally, of having mercy for folks. And it starts with being able to have those conversations where you talk from your place of vulnerability, and you are able to say like, hey, I'm worried about you. And if they can be like, well, I'm fine. I know you may think you're fine, but this is why I'm worried about you. This is what worries me. And so if you feel fine, like that's great. But I just want you to know that if you ever don't feel fine, like I'm here and we can talk about it. And I just want you to be around. I have to say, like, I've taught this class now a couple times now, and I've had to step back and take my own advice with my family. I've had to like, wait a minute, like I teach these techniques to people and I'm not using these techniques because we get so fired up. Like, even if you're not somebody who is like a passionate, fired up kind of person, but when we care about somebody, there's so much at stake. And so again, it's looking at that lens of like, we're not talking about whether they're going to get vaccinated or not. That's actually not what this argument is about. What this argument is about is like your health and safety. And like me also feeling like I have a say or control of what choices you make and how those choices affect my life, and the health and safety of my own life. And you're in community with that person. So you're also saying your choices and your decisions could break up our community, could end our community. So I don't know if that helps.
I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Marcy, you're muted.
Thank you. Let me say that for the question regarding the recording. So we are recording it, and I'm happy to share it with anybody who's not on the Magnolia UCC mailing list. If you wouldn't mind just sending me an email and I'll get it to you. St. Paul's people, I'll send it to Francine, and so you'll get it through Francine and she can put it in the St. Paul's email for you. But anybody who's not St. Paul's or Magnolia are not on our mailing list, if you'll send me an email to Marcy, MARCI, at magnoliaucc.org, and I'll put it in the chat. I will make sure I send it to you, okay?
And you just reminded me, I'm going to drop a handout in the chat box. I forgot to do that.
Yes. And for the Magnolia folks, I'll go ahead and put the that handout when I send out the recording in our MailChimp. And the St. Paul's folks, I'll send that to Francine as well. So if you can't get it out, don't worry about that.
Okay. I want to make sure I'm giving you a PDF, and yeah, I think that's a PDF. Okay. It's loading.
Okay. Any last questions? Okay. Well, then I just want to take this time to say thank you to Reverend Alyssa. What an amazing presentation. What a great speaker you are, and what a wealth of content you are for something that is, I think, near and dear on so many of our hearts right now. And what you gave us was some beautiful, actionable ways into this. So thank you, thank you, thank you to Reverend Alyssa. It's a real honor having you here.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming tonight. I'm going to tell you